My husband was digging through trash for expired coupons, while I held a ticket worth $43 million. For 64 years, I wore the same jacket, counted every penny, lived like we had nothing. But I was secretly richer than half our town, and no one knew. When I finally decided to surprise my family with the truth, my husband exploded. He screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. My daughter stopped speaking to me. My grandchildren started crying. And my marriage of 44 years almost ended that night. All because I made one terrible decision about the biggest win of my life. Hit subscribe right now, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about money, family, and secrets forever. And trust me, you need to hear what happened when my husband found out the truth. My name is Margaret Collins, but everyone calls me Maggie. What I'm about to tell you started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Springfield, Ohio, but it became the most extraordinary nightmare and blessing of my entire life. Picture this. I'm standing in line at Kroger with my weekly groceries, day-old bread marked down 50%, milk approaching its expiration date, store-brand everything because name brands are paying for advertising, according to my husband Roy. Behind me in line was a young mother with two small children. The little boy reached for candy at the checkout, and I heard her say those words I knew too well. "Not today, sweetheart. Maybe when Mummy has more money." That tired, defeated voice. I'd used it with my own daughter Sarah 30 years ago. I'd heard it from my mother 40 years before that. It's the sound of women who've spent their lives saying no to small pleasures because bigger necessities always came first. Roy and I had been married 44 years at that point, and every single one of those years had been marked by careful budgeting, strategic shopping, and the constant calculation of whether we could afford anything beyond absolute necessities. Our house was a testament to this philosophy. We bought it in 1985 with a 30-year mortgage that we'd finally paid off just 3 years earlier. The brown living room furniture was the same set we'd purchased on credit as newlyweds, sofas that had been reupholstered twice, a coffee table with ring stains from decades of careful use, and lamps that Roy had rewired himself rather than replace. The kitchen appliances were a museum of Roy's repair skills. Our refrigerator was 22 years old and hummed loudly enough to hear from the next room. But Roy had replaced the compressor twice and insisted it was good for another decade. The dishwasher had been broken for 6 months, but we washed dishes by hand because a repair estimate of $300 seemed outrageous when we had two perfectly functional hands each. Roy himself was a product of this scarcity mindset. He'd grown up during the tail end of the Depression era, raised by parents who'd learned that luxury was dangerous and waste was sinful. At 68, he still wore shirts until they developed holes, shoes until the soles separated from the uppers, and jackets until the zippers failed permanently. His daily routine never varied. Up at 6:30, coffee from grounds we bought in bulk and stored in old mason jars, breakfast of oatmeal and toast made from bread I baked myself because store-bought was paying someone else to do what you can do at home. After breakfast, Roy would retreat to his workshop in the garage, where he spent his retirement days fixing things that weren't broken, maintaining equipment that didn't need maintenance, and organizing tools that were already perfectly organized. The workshop was Roy's kingdom. Every screwdriver hung in its designated spot, outlined in black marker so he could tell immediately if something was missing. Coffee cans held sorted screws, bolts, and washers, each can labelled in Roy's careful handwriting. He'd built the workbench himself from lumber he'd bought at a bankruptcy auction, and he maintained it with the same obsessive attention he brought to everything else in our lives. For 44 years, this system had worked for us. We'd never been rich, but we'd never been desperate either. Roy's pension from the county maintenance department combined with our social security, provided enough for a modest but stable life. We could pay our bills, keep our house in repair, help our daughter Sarah when she really needed it, and even save a small amount for emergencies. But we never splurged. We never took vacations beyond camping trips to state parks. We never bought anything new if something used would serve the same purpose. We never, ever spent money on lottery tickets, restaurant meals, or anything Roy classified as waste. Which makes what happened next even more shocking. Standing in that grocery line, listening to the young mother explain to her children why they couldn't have treats, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the sameness of my Tuesday routine, identical to hundreds of other Tuesdays stretching back years. Maybe it was the bright lottery display, catching the fluorescent light, promising possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. 4783, said Linda Morrison, the cashier who'd known me for years. I counted out the exact change, including 83 cents in coins from Roy's change jar. As Linda handed me my receipt, she gestured toward the lottery display. Powerball's up to 127 million. Someone's going to have a very good week. Normally, I would have smiled politely and said something about not believing in gambling. Roy's voice would have echoed in my head. Lottery tickets are a tax on people who are bad at math. Instead, I heard myself say, one Powerball ticket. $5. The cost of a fast food lunch we'd never buy. The cost of a magazine we'd never purchase. The cost of hope we'd never allowed ourselves to afford. Linda looked slightly surprised, but didn't comment. She printed the ticket and handed it to me with my receipt. Good luck, Mrs. Collins. I folded the ticket and slipped it into my purse, underneath my checkbook, where Roy would never see it. The numbers were random: 7, 14, 23, 35, 58, with a red Powerball of 12. I glanced at them briefly, but didn't pay much attention. When you're not used to hoping for miracles, lottery numbers seem as meaningless as any other random sequence. At home, Roy was exactly where I expected him to be, in his workshop, radio tuned to the AM talk station he listened to every day. I could hear him making commentary to himself about federal spending and government waste, the same complaints he'd been voicing for decades. I put away the groceries with my usual systematic approach. Canned goods in the pantry, organized by type with newer items rotated to the back. Produce in the refrigerator crisper drawers. Frozen items in our small freezer, which Roy defrosted manually every 6 months to keep it running efficiently. The lottery ticket stayed in my purse. Forgotten. That afternoon brought a phone call that would make my eventual lottery win even more complicated. "Hi, Mum," said Sarah, and I immediately heard stress in her voice. "I need to talk to you about something." Sarah is 36, married to Tom Henderson, with 2 teenagers, Jacob, 16, and Emily, 12. She works as a dental hygienist at Dr. Patterson's office downtown, while Tom does construction work when the weather permits and odd jobs during the winter months. They're good people who work hard and love their children, but like many families, they struggle to make ends meet on irregular income. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "It's Jacob's computer. It crashed completely yesterday. Tom tried to fix it, but the hard drive is dead. All his school projects, his college application essays, everything is gone." My stomach sank. Jacob was a junior in high school, a good kid who worked part-time at the grocery store and maintained decent grades, despite the challenges of growing up in a family where money was always tight. "Can the data be recovered?" We took it to that computer repair place on 5th Street. They said it would cost $800 to try to recover the files and fix the hardware. For that much money, they recommended just buying a new computer. $800. For Roy and me, that represented nearly 2 months of grocery budgets. For Sarah and Tom, with their mortgage payments and the constant expenses of raising two teenagers, it was a financial crisis. What about a used computer? We've been looking, but even the used ones that would meet Jacob's needs for school are running $400 to $500, and there's no guarantee about reliability. I could hear the frustration and worry in Sarah's voice. She and Tom were proud people who worked hard to provide for their children without asking for help. This conversation was clearly difficult for her. Mum, I hate to ask, but would it be possible for you and Dad to help us? Maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan. This was exactly the type of request that would send Roy into his careful calculation mode. He'd weigh the cost against our budget, consider the long-term impact on our financial security, and probably conclude that while the need was real, the expense was beyond what we could reasonably afford. Let me talk to your father, I said. I'll call you back tonight. After Sarah hung up, I sat in our living room thinking about the conversation I was about to have with Roy. I could predict his response almost word for word. He'd suggest that Jacob could use computers at school and the library for his projects. He'd propose that the boy work extra hours at his grocery store job to save up for a used computer. He'd point out that college students had been writing applications and essays for decades before everyone had personal computers. All of these suggestions would be technically reasonable, but they would also ignore the reality of how education works now. Jacob's classes required digital submissions, online research, and collaborative projects that were difficult to complete using public computers with time restrictions. Without his own computer, Jacob would be at a significant disadvantage compared to his classmates during his crucial junior year. That evening, Roy and I had exactly the conversation I'd anticipated. $800 is a lot of money for something that's essentially optional, Roy said, after I explained the situation. Roy, it's not optional. He needs it for school. Schools have computers. Libraries have computers. When I was his age, we didn't have any computers and managed just fine. When you were his age, schools didn't require students to submit assignments online or research everything on the internet. Times may change, but money is still money. We can't solve every problem by throwing cash at it. We were heading toward one of our careful disagreements, the kind where we both stated our positions politely and nobody's mind got changed. Roy finally said he'd think about it, which meant he'd spend the next few days calculating exactly how $400 would impact our long-term financial security. Wednesday evening brought the lottery drawing that would change everything, though I'd almost forgotten about the ticket in my purse. At 11 o'clock, after Roy had gone to bed with his usual early-to-rise schedule, I found myself restless and unable to sleep. I went to the kitchen to make tea and remembered the lottery ticket. On impulse, I turned on the small television we kept on the kitchen counter and found the local station that broadcast the drawing. The process was surprisingly simple. A woman in a business suit stood next to a machine that looked like a cross between a bingo tumbler and an aquarium. She explained the rules briefly, then started the machine that would select the winning numbers. The first number was 7. I pulled the ticket from my purse and looked at my numbers: 7, 14, 23, 35, 58, with Powerball 12. 7 was my first number. The second number was 14. My heart started beating faster. The third number was 23. I stood up from the kitchen table, still staring at the television. The fourth number was 35. This was impossible. The fifth number was 58. I couldn't breathe properly. Finally, the red Powerball, 12. I looked at my ticket again, certain I was misreading something, but the numbers were exactly the same, every single one. I had won the Powerball jackpot of $127 million. The woman on television was congratulating whoever held the winning ticket. explaining that they should sign the back immediately and contact the lottery office. She mentioned that after taxes and choosing the lump sum option, the winner would receive approximately $43 million. $43 million. The number was so large it didn't seem to belong in the same universe as my kitchen, with its 20-year-old appliances and carefully budgeted grocery receipts stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. My first instinct was to run upstairs and wake Roy immediately. We could help Jacob with his computer. We could help Sarah and Tom with their mortgage. We could replace every appliance in our house, take the vacation we'd never afforded, stop worrying about money for the rest of our lives. But something made me hesitate. For 44 years, Roy had been the financial decision-maker in our household. He balanced our checkbook, planned our budget, decided what we could and couldn't afford. It wasn't because I was incapable. I'd managed money just fine before we married. But because Roy was naturally cautious and methodical, and I'd gradually deferred to his judgment on financial matters. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I had access to an amount of money that would make Roy's careful calculations irrelevant. We could afford anything, everything. The constraints that had shaped every financial decision we'd ever made together had just disappeared. And I realized I wasn't ready to immediately hand that power over to Roy's management. I wanted to sit with this secret for a while. I wanted to imagine what it would feel like to have unlimited options, to dream about possibilities without immediately having to consider practical limitations. I wanted to experience being rich, even if only in my imagination, before Roy's natural caution transformed the windfall into investment strategies and responsible financial planning. I hid the ticket in an old cookie tin in the pantry, behind the canned goods, in the only place in our house where Roy never looked, because he considered cooking my domain. Thursday morning, I woke up wondering if the entire experience had been a dream. But the ticket was still in the cookie tin, and checking the lottery website on our old computer confirmed that the winning numbers were indeed 7, 14, 23, 35, 58, with Powerball 12. No one had claimed the prize yet. I was officially a multimillionaire, and only I knew it. The surreal nature of the secret became apparent immediately. Roy made coffee in our cracked carafe, complained about the morning news, and discussed his plans for reorganizing his workshop storage system. Meanwhile, I sat across from him at our kitchen table, a woman worth more than most people's houses, eating store-brand oatmeal and nodding along with his concerns about the electric bill. After breakfast, I called the state lottery office. "Congratulations on your win," said a woman named Patricia, who clearly handled these calls regularly. "I need to walk you through the claiming process and your options." Patricia explained that I had 180 days to claim the prize, and that most winners chose to remain anonymous initially while they organized their affairs. She strongly recommended consulting with financial advisors and tax attorneys before making any decisions about how to receive the money. "Take your time," Patricia advised. "This is a life-changing amount of money, and you want to make the right choices for your situation." After hanging up, I sat in our bedroom looking around at the mismatched furniture we'd accumulated over decades of careful shopping. The dresser was from our early marriage, the nightstands were yard sale finds from the 1990s, and the bedspread was one I'd sewn myself from fabric remnants. This room represented 44 years of shared financial decisions, shared dreams deferred because they seemed impractical, shared acceptance of limitations that now no longer existed. It was also the room where Roy and I had maintained the intimate partnership that had sustained our marriage through all its challenges. Now I was sitting in this familiar space, harboring a secret that could change everything about our relationship. The question was whether that change would strengthen our partnership or create complications I couldn't predict. Friday brought my first real test of keeping the secret. I went grocery shopping as usual, but this time I felt like I was playing a role in a theatre production about being a careful shopper. I went through the motions of comparing prices and looking for managers' specials, but the exercise felt absurd when I knew I could afford to buy anything in the store without thinking about cost. Instead of my usual budget-conscious selections, I found myself making small upgrades. Real maple syrup instead of the corn syrup version. Fresh strawberries despite their out-of-season price. A nice piece of salmon that cost more than we usually spent on meat for an entire week. But then something happened that made my blood run cold. At the checkout, Linda noticed the changes immediately. "Having a party, Mrs. Collins? This looks like special occasion shopping." "Something like that," I said, paying with cash from our household account. Linda leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know, Mrs. Collins, I've been working here for 10 years, and I've seen this before." My heart stopped. Seen what? When people suddenly start buying expensive items they never bought before. Usually means one of two things. Either someone got an inheritance, or— She paused dramatically. "Someone won something big." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't know what you mean." Linda winked. "Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. But honey, if I were you, I'd be more careful about changing my shopping patterns so dramatically. People notice things in a town this size." The total was nearly double my usual grocery bill, but I could barely focus on the numbers. Had Linda actually figured it out, or was she just fishing for gossip? At home, Roy was indeed curious about the upgraded groceries. "That's quite a lot of food for a Friday shop," he observed, helping me put things away. "Some good sales I couldn't pass up," I said, but my voice sounded shaky even to me. Roy looked at me more closely. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just tired." But Roy's antenna was up now. He seemed pleased when he tasted the improved quality of our meals, but I caught him watching me with a puzzled expression. "This salmon is really good, Maggie. Where did you find it on sale?" "End of day markdown," I lied, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. That night, I lay awake wondering if Linda would keep her word about keeping my secret, whatever she thought it was. And more terrifyingly, I wondered how many other people might start noticing the changes in my behavior. Over the next several days, I began making other small changes. I bought Roy new work shirts to replace the ones that were becoming threadbare, claiming they were on clearance. I upgraded our laundry detergent to a brand that worked better but cost more. I bought flowers for our kitchen table, saying they were marked down at the grocery store. Each small deception was easy to justify. These weren't major purchases that would significantly impact our budget. They were tiny improvements that made our daily life more pleasant without raising red flags about my spending patterns. But they were also practice for lying to my husband, and that felt increasingly uncomfortable. Then came the moment I almost lost everything. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I'd bought the winning ticket, Roy was balancing our checkbook at the kitchen table, a weekly ritual he'd maintained for our entire marriage. He had all our receipts spread out in neat piles, and he was entering each expense into his ledger with the methodical precision he brought to everything. "Maggie," he said, looking up from the numbers with a puzzled expression, "our grocery spending is up almost 40% this week. Did prices increase that much?" My stomach dropped. Roy was too observant and too systematic to miss a pattern like that. I I've been buying some better quality items lately." Better quality is one thing, but 40% is significant. Where is this extra money coming from? I could see Roy's mind working through the possibilities. We had a modest emergency fund, but touching it required discussion and agreement between us. Our checking account balance was carefully monitored, and any unusual spending would be noticed immediately. Roy's eyes narrowed. Maggie, did you take money from our savings account? This was it, the moment where everything could unravel. Roy was 60 seconds away from checking our bank balance online, and when he did, he'd discover not only that I'd been spending more, but that I'd opened a new account he didn't know about. Roy, I said carefully, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. What if I told you I had a surprise planned? A good surprise. Could you trust me until this weekend? Roy stared at me for a long moment. In 44 years of marriage, I'd never asked him to trust me with financial decisions he couldn't understand. His hand was literally reaching for the computer keyboard. What kind of surprise requires secret spending? The kind that will make the spending seem very small in comparison. Roy's hand hovered over the keyboard. One click and my secret would be exposed. Not in the celebration I'd planned, but in an interrogation that would destroy any chance of the joyful revelation I'd imagined. Maggie, you're starting to worry me. Are you sick? Did you get bad news from a doctor? No, honey, nothing like that. I promise you'll understand everything this weekend. For what felt like an eternity, Roy's hand stayed suspended over the keyboard. I watched his face, seeing the war between his natural caution and his trust in me after decades of marriage. Finally, slowly, he pulled his hand back. This weekend, he said. But Maggie, if this is about spending money we don't actually have, I promise you we have the money. Roy closed the laptop without checking our accounts, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, and I knew I was living on borrowed time. That was technically true, even if Roy didn't know about it yet. But the close call made me realize that I couldn't maintain this secret much longer. Roy was too smart and too attentive to miss the changes in our spending patterns. More importantly, the deception was creating a distance between us that felt wrong after decades of partnership. And I had no idea that across town, someone else was about to make my secret impossible to keep. Wednesday morning brought a phone call that made my heart stop. Mrs. Collins, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison Welsh and Associates. I'm calling about your recent lottery claim. I was in the kitchen making coffee. Roy was in the shower. The timing couldn't have been worse. What do you need? I whispered. We have some paperwork irregularities that need to be cleared up before we can process your final payment. Can you come in today? Irregularities? My voice was getting higher. What kind of irregularities? Nothing serious, but there's been some confusion about your identity verification. We need you to come in person to sort it out. I could hear Roy's shower turning off upstairs. In about 5 minutes, he'd be coming down for breakfast. I'll be there this afternoon, I said quickly and hung up. But as I stood there in our kitchen, holding the phone and trying to calm my racing heart, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Roy was talking to someone upstairs, on the phone, and I could hear him saying, "Yes, she's been acting strange lately, spending money we don't have." Who was he talking to? Our doctor? A financial advisor? Someone from the bank? I crept to the bottom of the stairs, straining to hear more. I'm worried she might be having some kind of breakdown, Roy was saying. The spending, the secrecy, the way she's been acting. There was a long pause while he listened to whoever was on the other end. No, I haven't checked our accounts yet. She asked me to wait until the weekend, but I'm starting to think. Another pause. You think I should check anyway, even though I promised I wouldn't? My hands were shaking. Roy was about to discover everything, but not in the celebratory way I'd planned. He was going to find out because someone had convinced him I was having a mental health crisis. But who was he talking to? And what would happen when he discovered the truth? I was about to find out because I heard him say, "You're right. I'll check our accounts right now. If something's wrong, I need to know." Footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Roy was heading for the computer in our bedroom. In 30 seconds, he was going to discover that I had $43 million in an account he'd never heard of. This was not how I'd wanted him to find out. I had about 20 seconds to make a decision that would determine how my marriage survived this moment. I could run upstairs and confess everything right now, before Roy discovered it himself. But that would mean destroying my carefully planned surprise and probably making the situation even more dramatic. Or I could try to buy more time somehow. I grabbed the phone and dialed Roy's cell phone. From upstairs, I heard it ringing. "Hello?" he answered, sounding distracted. "Roy, it's me. I'm downstairs. Could you come down? I need to tell you something important." There was a pause. "Maggie, I was just about to—" "Please, Roy. It's about the surprise I mentioned. I think it's time you knew." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm coming down." I heard the computer chair creak as he got up. Footsteps in the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Roy appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his robe, looking worried and confused. "Maggie, what's going on? Who were you talking to?" "Someone from the lottery office," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "The lottery office? Why would the lottery office be calling you?" Roy was halfway down the stairs now, and I could see the exact moment when understanding began to dawn in his eyes. "Maggie," he said slowly, "what lottery office?" "Roy, I need you to sit down." "I'll stand. What lottery office?" "The state lottery office. Roy, I won." "Won what?" "The Powerball. Last Wednesday. $43 million. Roy stopped moving entirely. He stood there on our staircase, one hand on the banister, staring at me like I'd just told him I was from Mars. "That's not funny, Maggie." "It's not a joke." $43 million. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "I wanted to surprise you this weekend." Roy sat down on the stairs, right there in the middle, still staring at me. "A week," he said. "You've known for a week." "Almost 2 weeks now." 2 weeks. His voice was getting louder. 2 weeks? And that's when Roy started shouting. 2 weeks you've been lying to me about $43 million! His voice was so loud it echoed through the house. So loud that I was sure the neighbors could hear every word. But I had no idea just how much trouble that was about to cause. Friday brought the call I'd been waiting for. The lottery office confirmed that the funds were ready for transfer. $43,750,000 had been deposited into my new bank account. I was officially one of the wealthiest people in Springfield, Ohio, and still only I knew it. Saturday morning, I woke up with nervous energy about the evening ahead. I spent the day cooking an elaborate dinner: glazed ham that cost $40, homemade rolls with real butter, green bean casserole made with fresh beans instead of canned, and chocolate cake from the upscale bakery downtown. Roy noticed the expensive preparations and asked about the cost several times throughout the day. "Maggie, this looks like Christmas dinner. How much did all this food cost?" "It's a special occasion," I said, which was true if incomplete. "What's the special occasion?" "You'll find out tonight." Roy seemed puzzled but didn't press further. He spent the afternoon cleaning house with unusual attention to detail, as if preparing for company he wanted to impress. As evening approached, I felt increasingly nervous about how the revelation would unfold. I'd imagined this moment dozens of times over the past 2 weeks, always picturing joy and excitement and family members hugging and making plans together. But there was also a nagging worry that I couldn't shake. What if my family's reaction wasn't what I expected? What if the money created problems instead of solving them? Sarah and her family arrived at 5 o'clock, with Jacob and Emily curious about the elaborate dinner and the mystery surrounding it. "Grandma, why is everything so fancy?" Emily asked, looking at our dining room table set with cloth napkins and our good china. "Sometimes it's nice to make things special," I said, hugging her close. Jacob was more direct. "Did you and Grandpa win something?" "Why would you think that?" "The food, the fancy table, the way you keep smiling like you have a secret." Smart boy. Maybe I do have a secret. Dinner was delicious, better than anything I'd cooked in years, thanks to the quality ingredients I'd been able to afford. Everyone complimented the food, and the conversation was warm and lively, filled with updates about school, work, and neighborhood news. But underneath the pleasant dinner conversation, I could feel the tension of my secret pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I kept catching Roy's eye across the table, seeing his puzzled expression as he tried to figure out what I was planning. After we finished the main course and I'd served the bakery cake, I suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert. "Before we do that," I said, standing at the head of the table, "I have something to tell all of you." The room went quiet immediately. Roy set down his coffee cup and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part curiosity, part concern, part anticipation. "2 weeks ago," I began, "I did something I'd never done before. I bought a lottery ticket." Roy's eyebrows went up. "Maggie." "Let me finish, honey. I bought one Powerball ticket at Kroger on impulse, without really thinking about it. I didn't even pay attention to the numbers at first." I paused, looking around the table at my family. Roy with his careful, practical approach to everything. Sarah, who'd inherited her father's cautious nature but had more flexibility in how she applied it. Tom, who worked so hard to provide for his family despite irregular income. Jacob and Emily, teenagers on the verge of adulthood who deserved every opportunity we could provide. "I won," I said simply. Silence. "Won what?" Sarah asked. "The lottery, the Powerball jackpot. After taxes, $43 million. The silence stretched longer this time. Roy was staring at me as if I'd just announced that I was actually an alien from another planet. Sarah's mouth was open, but no words were coming out. Tom was looking back and forth between Roy and me as if waiting for someone to explain the joke. Jacob had stopped eating his cake mid-bite. Emily was the first to speak. "Grandma, that's a really, really big number." "Yes, sweetheart, it is. Like, bigger than our house." "Much bigger than our house." Roy found his voice, and it wasn't happy. "Maggie, what are you talking about? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. "I won 2 weeks ago, on the Wednesday night drawing. I wanted to wait until I could tell everyone at once, and I wanted to make it special." "2 weeks?" Roy's voice was getting louder. "You've known for 2 weeks and didn't tell me." The celebration I'd planned was turning into exactly the confrontation I'd hoped to avoid. Sarah looked distressed, Tom was clearly uncomfortable, and Jacob and Emily were watching their grandparents with wide, worried eyes. "Roy, please try to understand." "Understand what?" Roy stood up from the table, his face red with anger and hurt. That my wife of 44 years doesn't trust me enough to share the most important news of our lives? It wasn't about trust. Then what was it about, Maggie? Because it sure feels like you don't think I'm capable of handling this kind of information. Roy was getting louder, and I could see the children becoming more upset. This was exactly what I'd wanted to avoid. Dad, please calm down, Sarah said, using the same tone she used when Jacob and Emily were fighting. Calm down? Roy turned to look at Sarah. Your mother has been lying to me for 2 weeks about $43 million and you want me to calm down? I didn't lie, I said, though I knew that was splitting hairs. I just wanted to surprise everyone. Well, congratulations, Roy said bitterly. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that after 44 years of marriage, you think so little of my judgment that you'd make decisions about millions of dollars without consulting me. Roy left the dining room, and I heard the back door slam as he went outside. Through the window, I could see him walking toward his workshop with the stiff, angry posture of someone trying to contain explosive emotions. The remaining dinner guests sat in uncomfortable silence. Emily started crying quietly, and Jacob put his arm around her with the protective instinct of an older brother. I'm sorry, I said to Sarah and Tom and the children. I wanted this to be special for everyone, and I've made a mess of it instead. It's okay, Grandma, Emily said through her tears. Grandpa's just surprised. He'll feel better when he thinks about it. Maybe we should go, Tom said quietly. Give you and Roy some time to work this out. Sarah nodded reluctantly. We can talk more tomorrow, when everyone's had a chance to process this. As my family gathered their things and prepared to leave, I felt like the lottery win had already damaged the relationships I'd hoped to strengthen. After they left, I sat alone in the dining room, surrounded by the fancy dishes and leftover food that had seemed like such a good idea that morning. The house felt heavy with silence and disappointment. Eventually, I worked up the courage to go to Roy's workshop. He was sitting on his workbench, not actually working on anything, just sitting and staring at the wall where his tools hung in their precise arrangements. The radio was off, which was unusual. Roy always had the radio on when he was in his workshop. Roy, I said from the doorway, can we talk? He didn't look at me. $43 million, Maggie. 43 million. And you didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise everyone. Surprise us or control us? That question hit harder than I'd expected, because there was truth in it that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Maybe both. Roy finally looked at me, and I could see that he wasn't just angry. He was hurt in a way that went deeper than the money. For 44 years, he said quietly, we've made every major decision together. When to buy this house, how to raise Sarah, how to handle money, how to plan for retirement. Everything. And then the biggest thing that's ever happened to us, and you decide you know better than me how to handle it. It wasn't about knowing better. Then what was it about, Maggie? Because it doesn't feel like you trust me. I sat down on an old chair Roy kept in the workshop and tried to find words for feelings I hadn't fully understood myself. I do trust you, Roy. That's not why I didn't tell you. Then why? Because I knew that as soon as I told you, you'd want to make plans. You'd want to research investment strategies and tax implications and the most responsible way to handle the money. And all of that is smart and practical and exactly what we should do. But for just a little while, I wanted to imagine what it would feel like to have unlimited possibilities. I wanted to dream about what we could do for Sarah and the kids, what we could do for ourselves, without immediately having to worry about the practical details. Roy was quiet for a long time. I could see him trying to understand my perspective. You could have dreamed with me, he said finally. We could have imagined possibilities together. You're right. We could have. I should have told you immediately. Yes, you should have. We sat in uncomfortable silence, two people trying to find their way back to each other after trust had been damaged. I don't know how to be rich, Maggie, Roy said eventually. I've spent my whole life learning how to be careful with money, and now you're telling me we don't have to be careful anymore. We still have to be careful, just in different ways. What do you mean? I thought about the research I'd done during the 2 weeks I'd kept the secret, stories I'd read about lottery winners who'd lost their money or destroyed their relationships. Money this large comes with responsibilities we've never had to think about. We need to be careful about how we use it, how we protect it, how we make sure it helps our family instead of hurting them. Roy stood up and walked to his tool wall, straightening a wrench that was already perfectly aligned. You've been thinking about this for 2 weeks. What conclusions have you reached? This was my opportunity to share the planning I'd done, to bring Roy into the decision-making process I'd excluded him from. I think we should keep living basically the same way we always have, but without the financial stress. I think we should help Sarah and Tom and the kids, but gradually so they can adjust to the changes. And I think we should find ways to use some of the money to help other people in situations like ours used to be. Roy nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. I also think we should get professional help. Financial advisors, accountants, maybe lawyers. People who know how to handle this kind of money properly. Also, reasonable. And Roy, I think we should make these decisions together, like we've always done. I'm sorry I started out trying to control everything myself. Roy came over and sat on the workbench again, closer to my chair this time. I'm sorry I got so angry. It was just a shock, finding out that our whole life had changed and I was the last to know about it. You weren't the last to know. Everyone found out at the same time tonight. Except you knew for 2 weeks. Except I knew for 2 weeks. And I spent most of that time wishing I could share the excitement with you. Roy reached over and took my hand. So what do we do now? Now we figure out how to be rich people, I guess. Roy squeezed my hand and smiled for the first time since I'd made my announcement. Well, at least we can afford to fix that crack in the driveway. We both started laughing, and suddenly the lottery win felt like what it was supposed to be, something wonderful that had happened to us together. But our problems were far from over. In fact, the real nightmare was just beginning. The next morning brought an unexpected complication that made everything worse. Roy was in the kitchen making coffee when we heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, we saw our neighbour, Eleanor Henderson, standing in her yard, talking animatedly to two other neighbours I recognised but didn't know well. What do you think that's about? Roy asked, joining me at the window. Before I could answer, we heard a knock at our front door. Roy went to answer it while I stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear every word of the conversation. "Morning, Roy," said a voice I recognised as belonging to Bill Patterson, who lived 3 houses down. "Eleanor says there was quite a bit of yelling at your place last night. She was concerned, thought maybe there was trouble." I felt my stomach sink. In a small neighbourhood like ours, everyone knows everyone else's business, and Roy screaming about $43 million would definitely have carried to the neighbouring houses. "Everything's fine, Bill," Roy said carefully. "Just a family discussion that got a little heated." "Discussion about what?" "Eleanor said she heard something about millions of dollars. Thought maybe someone was being scammed or something." There was a long pause. I could picture Roy standing in our doorway, trying to figure out how much to reveal and how much to deflect. "It's a family matter, Bill," Nothing to worry about. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find us. These scam artists are getting pretty sophisticated these days. After Bill left, Roy came back to the kitchen with a grim expression. How much do you think he heard? I asked. Enough to know it was about money, probably enough to start rumors. But we had no idea how fast those rumors would spread, or how dangerous they would become. By Wednesday morning, something was very wrong. The phone rang at 7 a.m., unusually early for anyone to be calling. Roy answered while I was making breakfast. Collins' residence. What? Who is this? No, we don't have any comment. Roy hung up and looked at me with confusion and growing alarm. That was a reporter from the Springfield Herald. He wanted to ask about our recent financial windfall. How would a reporter know anything about the lottery win? Before I could answer, the phone rang again. This time, it was a woman claiming to be from a financial planning company, offering to help us manage our new wealth responsibly. Then another call from someone saying they were a long-lost cousin of Roy's, wanting to reconnect after all these years. This is getting out of hand, Roy said after the fourth call in an hour. How did word get out? I thought about Bill Patterson's visit the morning before, about Eleanor Henderson's obvious eavesdropping. The neighbours heard us arguing. They must have heard enough to piece something together, and now they're talking. But as the morning progressed, it became clear that this was more than just neighbourhood gossip. At 9 a.m., there was a knock at our door. Roy answered to find a well-dressed man with a briefcase. Mr. Collins, I'm David Martinez from Premier Investment Services. I understand your family has recently come into some significant money, and I wanted to discuss some exclusive investment opportunities. Roy practically slammed the door in the man's face. At 10 a.m., another knock. This time, it was a woman claiming to represent a charity that specifically helps lottery winners transition to their new lifestyle. By 11 a.m., there were 3 cars parked across the street from our house, people with cameras and notepads, clearly watching our home. Maggie, Roy said, looking out the window with growing panic. There are reporters outside our house. How is this possible? You said you chose to remain anonymous. I was asking myself the same question. The lottery office had assured me that my privacy would be protected for 60 days. But somehow, word had gotten out, and now our quiet neighbourhood was turning into a circus. The phone rang again. This time, Roy let me answer. Mrs. Collins, this is Detective Williams from the Springfield Police Department. We've had several reports of suspicious activity at your residence. Are you and your husband safe? Safe? What do you mean? Ma'am, we've had reports that your home is being watched by unknown individuals, and we've received calls from neighbours expressing concern about people approaching your house, claiming to be reporters and financial advisors. The detective explained that lottery winners were often targets for scams, fraud, and even more serious crimes. Have you noticed any unusual activity? Anyone following you or contacting you inappropriately? I looked out the window at the cars across the street, at the people with cameras, at the strangers who'd been knocking on our door all morning. Yes, I said, all of the above. Ma'am, I'm going to send a patrol car to your neighbourhood, and I strongly recommend that you and your husband consider staying somewhere else for a few days while this attention dies down. After I hung up, Roy and I looked at each other with a mixture of fear and disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen, I said. No, Roy replied. It wasn't. But it is happening, and we need to figure out how to deal with it. Hello, Maggie. I think it's time we had a conversation. The voice on the phone was smooth, confident, and completely unfamiliar. but something about the tone made my skin crawl. Who is this? Someone who knows your secret. All of it. Where you've been, what you've won, and what you've been trying to hide. Roy was standing next to me now, having noticed my expression. I put the phone on speaker. I don't know what you're talking about. The man laughed. $43,750,000, claimed last Wednesday at the state lottery office. Anonymous filing, but not anonymous enough, apparently. My hands started shaking. What do you want? What I want is very simple. A small percentage of your winnings in exchange for keeping certain information private. What information? Information about how long you kept this secret from your family. Information about the lies you told. Information about the, let's call them, questionable financial decisions you made before telling your husband. Roy grabbed the phone from me. Who the hell is this? Mr. Collins. Wonderful to finally speak with you. I imagine you have questions about your wife's behavior over the past 2 weeks. The secret bank accounts, the suspicious spending, the lies about where money was coming from. How do you know about any of this? I make it my business to know about lottery winners, Mr. Collins, especially ones who think they can keep secrets. Your wife has been very creative with the truth, hasn't she? I felt sick. This stranger knew details about my activities that only I should have known. How are you getting this information? That's not important. What's important is what I do with it. See, the story of a grandmother who lied to her family about winning millions. That's front-page news. The kind of story that makes people very angry at lottery winners. Roy was furious now. This is extortion. This is business, Mr. Collins. A simple transaction. Your wife pays me a small fee, let's say 5% of her winnings, and I make sure this story stays private. Everyone wins. And if we don't pay? Then tomorrow morning, every newspaper in the state runs a story about Margaret Collins, the selfish grandmother who hid millions from her family while they struggled to buy a computer for their grandson. The line went dead. Roy and I stared at each other in horror. Who was that? Roy asked. I have no idea, but he knows things. Things that only I should know. Like what? Like the exact amount of the winnings. Like when I claimed the prize. Like the fact that I opened a separate bank account. Roy's face was getting redder. You opened a separate bank account? Without telling me? Roy, that's not the important thing right now. It's not. What else haven't you told me, Maggie? What other secrets are you keeping? But before I could answer, we heard something outside that made us both freeze. Car doors slamming. Multiple car doors. We looked out the window to see not just the reporters who'd been watching our house, but now a full news van with a satellite dish. Camera crews were setting up equipment on the sidewalk in front of our house. And walking up our front walkway was a woman with a microphone, followed by a man with a video camera. Mrs. Collins, the woman called out, apparently seeing us through the window. Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a lottery win and why you chose to keep it secret from your family. Roy looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of betrayal, fear, and something that looked like he didn't recognize me at all. Maggie, he said quietly, what have you done to our lives? Cousin Roy, the man said, standing on our front porch with a big smile and an expensive-looking suit. Heard about your good fortune. Thought I'd stop by to congratulate you and maybe discuss some investment opportunities. Roy barely remembered the man's name, but suddenly we were his favorite relatives. The lottery office had warned me about this, how quickly news of a big win spreads, even when winners try to maintain privacy. What they hadn't prepared me for was how it would affect our relationships with people we'd known for years. Friday brought the most difficult conversation yet. "Mum," Sarah said when she called, "Tom and I need to talk to you and Dad about something." "What's wrong?" "It's not wrong exactly, it's just we've been thinking about the money and we're not sure how to handle it." That evening, Sarah and Tom came over without the children. Sarah looked uncomfortable in a way I'd rarely seen, and Tom seemed to be struggling with something he didn't want to say. "What's on your minds?" Roy asked once we were all seated in the living room. Tom looked at Sarah, who took a deep breath before speaking. "We've been talking about Jacob's college fund, and Emily's future education, and our mortgage, and all the ways this money could help our family." "That's wonderful," I said. "That's exactly what we want it to do." "But we're also worried," Sarah continued, "about what accepting help might mean for our independence, for our self-respect, for our relationship with you." Roy leaned forward, genuinely interested in understanding their concern. "We've worked hard to build our life," Tom said. "We're proud of what we've accomplished, even though it's been a struggle sometimes. We're worried that if we accept too much help, we'll lose that sense of accomplishment. And we're worried about the kids," Sarah added. "Jacob and Emily are good kids who understand the value of hard work. What happens to that understanding if suddenly money isn't something they need to worry about?" These were exactly the kinds of concerns I'd been thinking about during my 2 weeks of secrecy, but hearing them from Sarah and Tom made them feel more real and urgent. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "We want to accept help for Jacob's computer, and maybe his college tuition," Sarah said. "Those are investments in education that we can justify. But we'd like to keep working, keep paying our own mortgage, keep living basically the way we have been." "And we want the kids to keep their part-time jobs," Tom added. "We want them to understand that money comes from work, not from lottery tickets." Roy was nodding along with everything they said. "That sounds very sensible." "There's one more thing," Sarah said, looking even more uncomfortable. "We've heard that some families are torn apart by sudden wealth. We don't want that to happen to us." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "We mean that we want to make sure this money brings us closer together, not further apart. And if that means accepting less help than you want to give, we'd rather do that than risk damaging our relationships." The conversation continued for another hour, with all of us trying to work through the complex emotions and practical considerations that sudden wealth had introduced to our family dynamics. It was difficult but necessary, and by the end, I felt like we'd established some guidelines that everyone could live with. But the challenges kept coming. The following week brought a visit from someone I'd hoped never to see again, my sister Linda. Linda and I had been estranged for almost 10 years, ever since a family argument about money, ironically enough, had caused us to stop speaking. She'd accused Roy and me of being selfish with our modest resources when her husband had lost his job, and the conflict had escalated until we'd cut off contact completely. Now she was standing on our front porch with tears in her eyes and a story about financial desperation that she hoped our lottery winnings could solve. "Maggie," she said, "I know we haven't talked in years, but I heard about your good fortune, and I thought maybe this could be a chance for us to reconcile." What followed was an emotionally manipulative conversation in which Linda alternated between expressing genuine remorse for our past conflict and making increasingly specific requests for financial assistance. Her husband needed medical treatment they couldn't afford. Their house was in foreclosure. Their daughter needed help with college expenses. Some of Linda's problems were probably real, But her sudden reappearance in our lives, combined with her immediate focus on our money, made the conversation feel calculated rather than genuine. Roy, who had never liked Linda even before our estrangement, was polite but firm in suggesting that any financial assistance would need to be considered carefully and probably channeled through legitimate charitable organizations rather than direct family transfers. After Linda left, Roy and I had a long discussion about how to handle similar requests, which we both suspected would be coming from other relatives and acquaintances who had previously shown little interest in maintaining relationships with us. "This is going to be a problem," Roy said. "Word is spreading, and people are going to start coming out of the woodwork." He was right. Over the next month, we heard from people we hadn't seen in years, each with their own financial emergencies that our lottery winnings could supposedly solve. Some were family members, some were old friends, and some were people we barely remembered who claimed closer relationships than had ever actually existed. Each request put us in an impossible position. How do you distinguish between genuine need and opportunistic manipulation? How do you help people without encouraging dependency or resentment? How do you maintain relationships with people who might be more interested in your money than in you? The stress was taking a toll on both Roy and me. We'd gone from worrying about whether we could afford Jacob's computer to fielding daily requests for financial assistance from people who seemed to think our lottery win made us responsible for solving everyone else's problems. 3 months after my initial win, we made a decision that probably saved our sanity and our marriage. We hired a financial advisor named David Chen, who specialized in helping lottery winners manage their new circumstances. David's first recommendation was to establish a clear structure for charitable giving that would allow us to help people systematically rather than reactively. "You can't solve everyone's problems," David explained during our first meeting, "but you can establish criteria for the kinds of assistance you want to provide, and then stick to those criteria consistently." Working with David, we created a family foundation focused on educational assistance for students in situations similar to what Jacob had faced. We also established guidelines for helping family members that emphasized education and self-sufficiency rather than ongoing financial support. Most importantly, David helped us develop strategies for saying no to requests that didn't meet our criteria, without damaging relationships or feeling guilty about our good fortune. The foundation became our primary vehicle for helping others. Within 6 months, we'd provided computer equipment to dozens of high school students, established scholarship funds at the local community college, and supported literacy programs at the public library. These activities gave us a sense of purpose and accomplishment that simple personal spending couldn't provide. We were using our windfall to address problems we understood and cared about in ways that created lasting positive impact rather than temporary financial relief. But the personal relationships remained complicated. Jacob, now equipped with his new computer, was thriving academically and had been accepted to several colleges with partial scholarships that his improved grades had made possible. But he was also struggling with the knowledge that his college expenses would be covered by his grandparents' winnings rather than his own efforts. "It doesn't feel earned," he confided to me during one of our conversations. "I know I'm working hard, but I also know that if I mess up, there's this safety net that other kids don't have." Emily was dealing with different challenges. Some of her friends had become more interested in spending time at our house after word of the lottery win spread, while others had become distant, apparently uncomfortable with the change in our family's circumstances. "It's like people see me differently now," she said, "even though I'm the same person I was before." Sarah and Tom had maintained their decision to accept limited help while preserving their independence, but the dynamic had still changed. Family gatherings sometimes felt stilted, as if everyone was conscious of the money in ways that made natural conversation but more difficult. Roy and I were learning to navigate our own changed relationship with wealth. We'd upgraded some aspects of our life: better food, a newer car, home improvements we'd deferred for years, but we'd tried to maintain the basic character of our daily routine. Roy still spent most of his time in his workshop, though it was now a larger, better equipped space attached to the garage. I still did my own cooking and cleaning, though I now bought ingredients without worrying about cost and hired help for major projects. We'd taken our first real vacation in decades, a 2-week trip to Ireland that we'd dreamed about for years, but never thought we could afford. It was wonderful, but it also felt strange to be the kind of people who could travel internationally without worrying about the expense. The most difficult adjustment was learning to ignore the constant awareness that our lives were different now. Every purchase decision, every social interaction, every family conversation carried the subtle weight of our changed circumstances. But there were also profound satisfactions. Watching Jacob graduate high school with honors, knowing that his college education was secure regardless of economic circumstances. Seeing Emily pursue art lessons and music lessons that would have been impossible before, developing talents that might shape her entire future. Observing Sarah and Tom's relief at having their mortgage paid off, even though they'd insisted on maintaining their careers and financial independence. Most importantly, Roy and I had weathered the crisis of trust that my initial secrecy had created. It had taken months of difficult conversations, some arguments, and a lot of patience from both of us, but we'd eventually found our way back to the partnership that had sustained our marriage for decades. A year after the lottery win, we were sitting in our improved but still familiar living room, reading books and enjoying the comfortable quiet of an evening routine that wealth hadn't fundamentally changed. "Maggie," Roy said, looking up from his newspaper, "do you ever regret buying that lottery ticket?" I thought about the question seriously. The money had solved some problems, but created others. It had eliminated financial stress, but introduced social complications. It had provided opportunities, but also responsibilities we'd never anticipated. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it, but I wish I'd handled the first few weeks differently." "How so?" "I wish I'd told you immediately. I wish I'd trusted you with the news from the beginning, instead of trying to control how everyone reacted." Roy smiled. "I understand why you wanted to keep it secret for a while. It must have been exciting to imagine all the possibilities." "It was exciting, but it was also lonely. Good news is meant to be shared." "What about the challenges? The family complications? The people who've come out of the woodwork? The changes in how people treat us?" I considered this. Those things are difficult, but they're not the lottery's fault. They're just part of life, amplified by unusual circumstances. The important relationships in our lives, with each other, with Sarah and the kids, with the friends who really matter, those have actually gotten stronger, not weaker. Roy nodded. "I think you're right, and I'm proud of what we've done with the money, the foundation, the scholarships, the way we've tried to help people without creating dependency." "What are you most grateful for?" "Jacob's college fund," Roy said immediately. "Emily's opportunities, the security of knowing that whatever happens to us, our family will be okay. And this." He gestured around our living room. "The fact that we can afford to be comfortable without having to change who we are." 2 years after the lottery win, our lives had settled into a new normal that incorporated both our windfall and our values. We lived comfortably, but not ostentatiously. We helped others systematically, but not carelessly. We enjoyed opportunities that money made possible, while maintaining the relationships and routines that had always mattered most to us. The lottery ticket that had cost $5 and changed our lives was now framed and hanging in Roy's workshop, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes life surprises you in ways you never expected. A reminder that wealth is a tool, not a destination. And a reminder that the most important things in life, love, family, integrity, purpose, can't be bought, but can be strengthened by the wise use of unexpected resources. If you ever find yourself holding a winning lottery ticket, remember what we learned. The money itself isn't the real prize. The real prize is what you choose to do with it, how you let it change your life without losing what matters most about who you are, and how you use it to strengthen rather than complicate the relationships that give your life meaning. Most importantly, remember this: don't keep secrets from the people you love. Trust them with your good fortune from the beginning. Include them in your dreams and plans. The surprise isn't worth the damage it can cause to relationships that are more valuable than any amount of money. And if you're ever in a situation where someone you care about suddenly comes into wealth, remember that the adjustment is harder than it looks from the outside. Be patient with them as they learn to navigate their new circumstances. Support them as they figure out how to use their resources wisely. And don't let money, either its presence or absence, define your relationship with them. Subscribe to the channel if this story resonated with you, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you won the lottery tomorrow? Would you tell your family immediately, or would you need time to process it first? What would be the hardest part of suddenly having more money than you could spend? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because here's the truth that took me 2 years to fully understand. Winning the lottery didn't make me a different person. It just gave me the resources to become a better version of who I already was. And that, more than any amount of money, is the real prize.